welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowres, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40. Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, and that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to pay homage to their incredibly long history as storytellers. Today in the podcast, my very special guest is an extraordinary woman. After chatting with her, I love her even more. Her name is Marci Warhaft. Marci has had an extraordinary life, and she has written it all down in a memoir. And the memoir is actually called The Good Stripper, a soccer mum's memoir of lies, loss and lapdances. But she is far more than a stripper. Stripping, in fact, was only a part of her life. Marci's gone on to do some incredible things. She is an advocate for body positivity, having actually gone through an eating disorder and conquering that herself. She's quite extraordinary. She has written the Body Image Survival Guide for Parents, which helps children to bolster their self-esteem as they go through life. She has survived a traumatic, dysfunctional marriage. She's come through the other side. She's quite extraordinary. And through releasing this book and sharing her story and getting rid of a whole lot of shame, she's actually discovered herself. Please welcome to the confessional, Marci.
Hey there. When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly.
Hi, Marci, and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. How are you?
I'm so happy to be here and excited to talk. Let's do this.
I am super excited to have you in the confessional today because I love everything that you are doing. I think you spread such positivity across your social media platforms, and it's brilliant. So, but it wasn't always like that for you, this whole sense of positivity and wholeness. So I wanted to talk about a few things today. There's a lot to unpack here with you. You wrote this kind of extraordinary book, and I was just saying offline how raw, honest and brilliant it is, and your courage to tell this story. Your book is called The Good Stripper, a soccer mum's memoir of lies, loss and lapdances. How did the book come about?
Well, it's funny because I want to say first, while I do try to spread positivity, I'm also not somebody who's big on toxic positivity. So there's also a lot of me kind of venting, and when I'm angry, you'll know it. When I'm upset about something, you'll know it. But then when I want to sing and dance and be ridiculous, I do that too. And I think that's what's come out of me actually writing the book, is showing all of me. And I don't think that there's enough of that. I know that for me, I had spent decades hiding parts of my life. I had gone through a lot of trauma, and it led me in some directions I wasn't prepared for, equipped for, expecting. And I did some things that I wasn't proud of. I did some things that carried a lot of shame. I did things that carried a ton of fear because I was afraid I was a mom, and I was terrified that my kids would either find out about the mistakes I had made, or other people would find out and then they would be negatively impacted. And that was my worst fear. So I kept a lot of things hidden. And what that does, though, is by hiding so much of my past and what I carried with shame, I always say I wrapped my secrets in shame, and I hid them away, praying that they wouldn't escape. And then one day I said, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And I released them myself. And that's when the freedom came, because I felt I was living a partial life. I would meet somebody and I would think, okay, so how much do I tell them about my life? And when do I tell them? And I had no idea what people would do when they found out it personally, professionally, in any capacity. So I was so afraid of the truth coming out that I kind of kept myself smaller than felt comfortable. You know, even when I was a little kid, I was a go big or go home kind of gal. And I felt like I had to really not be fully me because I didn't want anyone to pick up on anything or anything. And then I got to a point I was turning 50 and something in me that said, this isn't right. It doesn't feel right. I didn't feel right in my own life. And I thought, for some reason, I kept thinking, okay, there's more years behind me than ahead of me. I'm not going to waste another minute not being fully me. I'm done feeling ashamed. I'm done feeling guilty. And I started to realize that I dedicate my book to people who may be struggling to forgive themselves for the mistakes they made when they were just trying to survive. And I realized that's what I had done. All of my mistakes, I'd never done anything maliciously. I'd never done anything to go out and hurt anyone except for myself. I had such low self-esteem that I was hurting myself and being self-destructive. But I did the best I could with what I had at that time. And in forgiving myself slowly, I really, all of that fear started to kind of, maybe it was a rebellious thing in turning 50, but it was this thing of like, you know what, I'm done hiding. I am going to, instead of being afraid that I'm going to meet somebody who's going to say, I know about your past, I'm going to put it out there so that nobody can come at me with anything that I haven't shared myself. And it was scary in the sense that I didn't know how people were going to react. However, I was finally at a place in my life where I was okay with me. And I had to get there, because if I wasn't okay with me and someone else then gave me a hard time, then I'd crumble. I'd crumbled in the past. But when I was finally okay with me and made peace with the stuff that I had done and who I was at that time, it didn't matter. It really didn't matter what other people thought. And it was the most liberating, exhilarating feeling to have it's still very bizarre when people say, I ordered your book. And I'm like, great. And then I'm like, oh my God, they're going to read it. I'm always like, you're going to learn a lot about me. You're going to know me intimately. But it's also this feeling of, so what can't I say now? What can't I do now? Because everybody knows everything anyway. So it really gives you this freedom. And maybe again, it's being in my 50s or something very powerful. I know that we're supposed to be afraid of getting older as women, but I think it's pretty friggin' amazing, because I do feel like when challenges come at me, not even challenges, opportunities. In the past, there are certain things I'd be like, oh, I'm afraid because what if I fail? What if I look stupid? Now I'm like, how can I not do it? I mean, now people just expect me to do the crazy thing. So how can I not? And that's such a much better feeling, because I think we're so fueled by fear, and I'm not fueled by fear anymore. And that's kind of how the book came out, because I wanted to release myself of the shame, and what's come out of it has been even better, because it's just led me to more and more and more.
God, I love this so much. You know, I built an entire platform on changing this narrative around aging. I'm very pro aging, and I think we have to embrace it as women, because what happens is we gain so much wisdom with every year that goes by, right? And that wisdom should be honored and embraced and shared. And what I loved about your book was how much wisdom you shared, because yes, this is a memoir. It's a powerful journey, but the insights that you give, not just about yourself, really, I felt would resonate with so many women. You know, regardless, our situations may all be different, but everyone, I believe, is carrying something that they really need to let go of it. Let go. And as you say, in hitting 50, how powerful. I think it was like Helen Mirren, the actress. I say this quite a bit, but she was the one who said, I just got to an age where I had no more fucks to give.
Yeah, that's it.
And I think it's powerful, right? Because you go, well, that's it. Let it go. So let's talk about that a little bit, though, because your book is powerful. So for those that don't know, it's got, as you know, quite an evocative title. But in actual fact, this book is more than just being your life as a stripper, which was not the biggest part of your life. So let's go back a little bit. So as a child, you had a fairly traumatic childhood, as many of us have had, which was difficult. was it because do you think you just didn't get the support? And I think a lot of women in our age bracket didn't get the kind of support we needed as
No, I
children.
think it was the opposite. Actually, it's funny
Ah,
because for me, yeah, I think my story is kind of opposite to some. I was lucky enough that even though my father left when I was young, and he left and left my mom with three kids to support, he wasn't a big part of my life, sadly. And so when he left, it was hard. I mean, I remember being at 10 years old and asking my mother what's so bad about me? My father doesn't even want to know me. But she was like, no, it's not you. And my mother was so incredible that I didn't miss not having my father around. So I was lucky enough to have a really spectacular parent, and I was very, very close with my older brother. And so he was 5 years older, and I had his love and his support. So I grew up with this amazing support where I felt loved and I felt protected. And my mother would tell me that I was beautiful, but she'd tell me even more than that, I was intelligent and that I was interesting and that what I said mattered. And so I grew up when I was quite young, feeling like I could do anything and feeling like I had a voice and I had a right to use it and a responsibility to use it. And I was a little dancer and singer and played sports. So all that was great. For me, I think the problem was that I lost that. So when I was 17 and my brother was 21 and he got sick and he died, that was, if I had to pick one thing out of all the traumas that would come after that, this was the one that changed my life completely, because all that support that I had was gone. And also he was so young and to me so vibrant, and like, how does a 21, no one I didn't know anyone who had lost a sibling. I didn't know anyone who lost a parent at that point. So nobody really knew what to do with me. My whole world was shattered because of if this could happen to him, I'm not safe. Plus, I felt that it should have been me. I felt that he was such a great person that I felt that the world needed him more than it needed me. And so that set me, this little girl who thought she could do anything suddenly felt like she didn't deserve anything. And I felt like I had to earn my place. And that created an eating disorder for me because I needed to control something. And the only thing I could control was my body. And I say that I always describe my brother as the invisible armor I wore out in the world to protect me. And my mom was my safe place to come home to. So losing my brother when I was 17 and then 10 years later losing my mom unexpectedly, I lost my armor and I lost my home. And so when that happened, life was still hitting me hard, but so I had all this support, lucky enough. I know I was lucky, but then I lost it. And then I was in a dysfunctional marriage. I was living on the other side of the country from everyone I knew. And things turned for me and things turned in my marriage. And then I didn't have the support. So it was, for me, it was sort of as I got older, at 17, losing what I felt was my self-worth and then having the world hit me and then losing my support. That's when things got really bad. So things really took a turn for me, really in my 30s was when things got really tough.
yeah, which I find really like fascinating, that kind of journey, but also I find it completely understandable. As you say, when you lose your support network, your support mechanisms, really,
Mm-hmm.
it makes total sense. And I think as women as well, that we tend to grapple when we're hit with really tough stuff. We tend to like take it all on, pull it inside of us, hold on to it. And so, I think many of us feel this kind of horrid low self-esteem. And then on top of that, what we get is this insane messaging from society and the patriarchy and the world. It's
Mm-hmm.
consistent, right? And all that does is feed into the narrative we're already telling ourselves. I'm not enough. Um,
Absolutely.
right? That's a
Right. Well,
big
that's it. Here
thing.
I'm telling myself that I need to be perfect to be worthy. I need to look perfect to be worthy. And then I have society saying, "Yeah, you're right. You do."
Right?
So
Yeah.
it wasn't that I was doing something super unhealthy. It wasn't like I was, shooting heroin and we know that that's bad, not comparing. But here if I know it's unhealthy because I'm starving myself or I'm over exercising or whatever, but everybody's, even my doctor was like, if you want to look good, you should lose some weight. Like every message is just cheering on my disorder. So of course it's going to be, and as women, as you said, I think we do take a lot on ourselves. And then for me, the compounding it was that when things got really bad with my marriage and things got bad with more traumas, I was a mom. So then it was this thing of, oh, trying to keep it together while also being a mom. So I can't really let myself deal with stuff. Like I every time a trauma hit, I'd push it down because I just didn't have time to deal with it. And you don't feel like you don't feel like it's almost like it's selfish to take the time you need to heal if you're taking care of other people. And I think that is a problem. And I think that is why, not to jump back and forth, but I think that is why so many women come into their own later, because it's a time, and maybe we have been married and maybe we're not. Maybe, our kids are grown, and we kind of look at ourselves and go, wait a second, who's this person? What does she want? What does she need? And it always drives me crazy when you'll see these posts or quotes saying, it's never too late you're never too old too. And I'm like, well, of course not. Like, for me, the idea that we should have it all together and do all the things that we want to do at 20, 30 is so insane to me, because we're not baked yet. Like, I feel like it took me half a decade to become this. Like, it takes time to become this. Like, you have to go through a lot of versions of yourself before you find the one that fits. So I think that it's kind of like, of course it's not too late. Like, this is the time. And I do wish that we could do that at every stage. I wish that at 20 we could own ourselves at 20. At 30 we can own ourselves at, but the idea that we should kind of slow down and take a back seat and not be seen and not be, when we get older, is so weird, because this is when we get it. It takes us this long to get it and to know that we deserve it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I just had a really interesting guest on. Her name's Faith the Goo, and she runs a platform called Silver Sirens. But what's really interesting about Faith is that she was saying that she's a qualified psychotherapist as well, and a lot of her clients were Western women who were feeling enormously, like, really badly depressed about aging, and about how lost they felt and how invisible they felt. And she, coming from an African background, said in her culture, women are revered as they get older. They say that the oldest person in the room is the most revered. Everybody wants to hear what they've got to say, the wisdom, all of these things. And so she was like, wow, I didn't realize this was such a big thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it really is. And it's so huge globally. This is I call it like an epidemic, because
it is.
women, it's like this invisible bloody line in the sand of when you hit 40, we're supposed to apparently start to lose our worth, And I feel really sad that for a lot of our mothers, and especially our grandmothers, it was true. The moment you were 40, you were considered to be quite old and on the shelf.
Well, I used to laugh. I used to run a program called Fit versus Fiction. It was a body image program for schools. And it's funny because it used to drive me crazy when you used to look at, when you watch TV and there were commercials for wrinkle cream, for example, and the model is like 22. Yeah. And you're like, of course you don't have any wrinkles. You're a child, and it's, so we never really knew what older women looked like either, because on TV you would have, in the same way that you would have literally somebody 30 playing an 18-year-old, which messes teenagers up, you would have a 30-year-old playing their mother. So you didn't know, but the husband could be 40, 50, but the wife was always played by someone younger. So we had no idea what a real 40-year-old woman looked like, or 50-year-old woman looked like, because they were always played by someone younger. So we compare ourselves to that, and we think, oh my God, I look horrible. But no, you don't. But we weren't allowed to see that. And I think also, to be honest, I think a lot of it is fear coming from the patriarchy, because I think that, like I said before, as we get older, we're not simmering down. Now we have less to preoccupy our time with as far as taking care of other people. So now is when we're going, hold on, now I have time to fight you. Now I have time to build myself up. Now I have time to break some glass ceilings. Like, now I have time to do this shit. And that scares people. So they have to keep telling us that we're not capable, because they know that we're more than capable.
Oh, absolutely. And the way that they really start to chip away at women is they attack the very thing that we are. We can't change that we're aging. We can't change how we look. I mean, you can do things, I guess, to help, change the way you look. But the reality is we all age. I mean, that is a reality. And as you say, this whole kind of ridiculous narrative that as men age, they're called silver foxes.
Yeah.
And as women age, we're called names like crone and hags. And, she's so old and so past it. And you think, what the hell? I think too, one of the reasons I started my platform, Women Beyond 40, was exactly that. For me, I couldn't see myself reflected back in media. I just couldn't see it. And I wanted, yes, I could see extraordinary actresses, older models, beautiful, incredible women. But for a lot of us, that's even a standard that is just, we can't achieve that regardless, right? A lot of that is genetics, Botox, plastic surgery and whatever. And those women are pressured in an industry to look a certain way, and they look incredible. But for most of us, it's an unrealistic standard to achieve. So I wanted to see everyday women like myself reflected back. I wanted to go, well, shit, I'm in my 50s. Where are all these 50s women at in media? So I started, and then I went out to get funding for this magazine that I started. And I was told by funders, who's going to want to hear about the stories of women, let alone women over 40? I kid you not, this really happened. And so then I went, oh, fuck that. And I just started it myself anyway. And it's powerful, because what happens then is so many women contact us and say, oh my God, this is so cool. Like you're showing women who are real, who have wrinkles, and who, I said, they've also achieved extraordinary stuff.
Imagine.
Wisdom lines. I think that's the other thing too. It is powerful. We can't be what we can't see.
100%. And I think, it's funny because I remember, so I lost my mom. She was 56 years old. So she was only 4 years older than I am now. Thank you. And she was lucky. She had amazing skin and just these amazing cheekbones. But one thing I remember is the little lines around her eyes, because she smiled a lot. And I love those lines, and I have those lines. And I've often said, if somebody came to me and said, I can remove them for you free of charge, painlessly, I'd say, no. I like those. That's, for me, when I think of her face and I think of those lines, I mean, that's joy for me. That's comfort for me. And I think the fact that we feel pressured to remove all signs of that we've lived, all signs of experience, I that saddens me. That saddens me a lot. And I know, like you said, there are a lot of, in the entertainment industry, I always say, I don't blame anyone. Anyone, entertainment industry or not, do what you want to do for your body. It's yours. However, I feel bad for an industry that makes women feel like they have to change who they are in order to be accepted or hired or whatever. That's what pisses me off. It's not that you do it, it's that some of us feel like we have no choice if we're going to compete in the professional world or anything. And it's when you talked about, even when you see people who are our age. I remember when Shakira and Jennifer Lopez did the Super Bowl and the halftime show, and they're fantastic. At the same time, I knew I was cringing when social media, what was going viral, not viral, but what was trending was, this is 50. And I'm like, that's not 50. Like, they're 50. They're 50. But to say, well, Jennifer Lopez looks like that at 50. Why doesn't everyone look? Let's not count all the ways in which, come on. So I do think that like you said, when we're seeing people who are our age, it's not really realistic. And I think that we need to see that. And like you said, we all age. If we're lucky, I mean, the truth is we don't all get to age.
Correct.
We most of my family died quite young. And I almost lost my life when I was 29 and became ill. And so I think that if we're lucky enough, of course, and it's so weird to me, it really is, it's so weird to me that we're expected to change emotionally as we get older. We're expected to change psychologically with experience, but we're not supposed to change physically. And that's the part that's dealing with the elements and all the things that go on. I mean, this is what's hitting us. But of course, you don't want to talk to somebody who's 50 who still acts like they're 10, because we're supposed to, but for some reason, none of that experience is supposed to show. And it's so weird. It doesn't even make sense. And it's bizarre, but it is a way of holding us back, making us feel like that we should hide ourselves. And that really does make it easier for everyone else. And we're done doing that.
Oh, 100%. I was laughing to myself just then as you were speaking, because it just really made me think about, how bizarre that we live in a world where someone like, say, the actress Annie McDowell dared to step on a red carpet with grey hair and wrinkles and said, "This is who I am." How bizarre that we live in a world where that
Brave.
was seen
Everyone says
as
it's,
as
yes,
an
it's
act of
act of
rebellion.
rebellion.
So brave of you. And she's like, brave? Damn, I've just stopped dyeing my hair. Like, you're right. I think it's quite
There's so many
incredible.
situations like that too. Yeah, where actors will do that. Like exactly.
Right?
It's great. I remember years ago it was Jamie Lee Curtis that did a cover
Yes.
of a magazine and she said, "Don't Photoshop anything." And she's in fantastic shape.
She's amazing.
And
Yeah.
she was like, "Don't Photoshop." And it was like, oh my God, she's so brave.
So
Like
brave.
anytime a woman is on a magazine without makeup and she's so brave. And it's just like, I'm sorry, saving, orphans from a burning building. That's brave. But not wearing
Right?
makeup. I mean, it's also so demeaning because it makes us sound like that's the worst thing in the world. Like, oh my God, if
Right?
I'm seen without that, then that's the worst. And it's like, no, we have other things. We have other things that we're like misogyny is kind of, I'm a little more worried about misogyny affecting my life
Maybe some
than,
global
being seen
warming,
without some lip gloss.
there's stuff
Exactly.
going on. I agree with you. It's quite interesting. I was raised by a pretty tough, fierce little disabled mother who was definitely left-wing and feminist, and she used to say, about her wrinkles, she goes, "I love them. I earned every one of those damn wrinkles." And she'd had a tough life, right? So but that always stayed with me, that I earned them. And I think as I got older, I went, shit, yeah, like I've earned all of mine as well. And as you were saying, how beautiful the laugh lines on your mother's face were,
Mm-hmm.
right? I love that. And Tara Moss, the author, incredible. She's, Canadian also, actually. Tara, actually, when she started to grow, like, she was getting like grey hairs through, and she calls them wisdom. What is she? Wisdom whispers, yes, wisdom whispers. And I just thought it's so adorable. Like, it's brilliant. I think that the more women that kind of go, well, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, these are my wrinkles, these are whatever. And as you say, in no way do I ever judge any woman if they want to do whatever they want to do. So if you go out and you have Botox, or women who have
Mm-hmm.
surgery, or women, whatever, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I dye my hair, whatever. I think,
Yeah.
I think we can't judge that either, because we're all a product of this society
Right.
that is completely telling us that we're supposed to be one way.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is we'll never ever live up to the standards. I mean, I think that that's the most ironic part. So even if you could achieve bizarrely some whatever perfection is, society will turn and say, we've changed our minds. That's no longer what is
Oh,
perfect,
100%.
right?
Plus, even when you've seen some people, some actresses who have done all the work and they don't have what you would characterize as signs of aging. So they don't have the wrinkles, they don't have the gray hair, they don't have any of that. They still look older. You still know that they're old, and then they'll be criticized for having the work done if the work isn't.
Right?
So you can't, because we just changed. So you'll know, and we might say, oh, her work looks great. But they don't all of a sudden, you don't go, what? How did that actress not age? We know she aged. You can tell she aged. It's so it doesn't even, it's not going to take away those years anyway. And like you said, then they'll just get criticized for having it done. It's like you get criticized if you don't, you get criticized if you do. And as you said, the trends are always changing. So if you try to
Always.
keep up with the trend, it's either, this time it'll be big boobs, and the next time it'll be small boobs, and then it'll be a big butt, and then it'll be small butt, and then it'll be freckles, and then no. I mean, it's all what the fashion industry is dictating, and you can't keep changing yourself. You can't. But there's a stat that said by the time a girl is 17 years old, she's seen 250,000 messages from the media telling her what she's supposed to
Yeah,
look
wow.
like. So then that's by the time she's 17. That was a quote from several years ago. And then you think about how many her mother's seen, how many her grandmother's seen, right? So these are just unbelievable images that are coming at us from the get-go. So of course we're going to question. Of course we're going to. And my thing now is I'll talk about on my show certain things, and we talked about porn addiction and things like that, and blaming Instagram influencers and OnlyFans for setting up unrealistic expectations for women. I don't agree. Not that I'm condoning it or whatever. I'm not either way. But I don't think that that anybody is looking at a porn star, for example, and thinking, oh, I want to look like that, because we know that it's not real. I'm more concerned with the ads that we've been seeing since we were little, just not even for cars, for jewelry, for things that have nothing to do with women, but the women who are selling them are made to look a certain way. This is just what we've been told from the get-go, and those are more subtle, and that's why I think they're more dangerous, because the other stuff that's obvious, we know, but it's the little thing. It's just the quiet message of why, like you said, why we don't see.
Yeah.
Just starting to see women of a different ages, different sizes, and still to this day, if Sports Illustrated or any other magazine dares to put a what they consider plus size model on, there's tons of people who will lose their minds over it, and it's insanity to me. But those are the things that I think are dangerous. It's the messages, the subtle messages that we've been getting forever, because we didn't even know we were ingesting them and consuming them, but they're the ones that have gone deep.
Absolutely. I shared a post the other day on Instagram, actually. It shared someone else's post, but it was a post about, how a whole generation of like millennials have body image issues because they were told through 3 different movies that Bridget Jones was fat.
Yes.
And now they look at her and go, she's not fat. And yet Renee Zellweger had to actually gain so much weight to play that part. And then she had to, when she lost all the weight to play the 3rd movie and had some work done, she was criticized then. She was criticized as she got older. She was criticized all the time. But I shared that post and I said, it's not just millennials. It's every Gen X woman felt the same way. Mm-hmm. We thought, wow, if she and for women who were naturally curvy, you kind of went, wow, well, if that's fat,
right, exactly,
I'm enormous, right? And so it's that kind of, you're right, it is the constant subtle messaging in all of that and all the way through. And then movies like, what was the other one that somebody raised when I popped it up was, oh God, what's the Christmas movie? It'll come to me. Love Actually. And they say there's a scene in there where the Prime Minister's assistant comes in, Natalie.
I've seen it so many times, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And they talk about her big thighs and and you go, what the hell? And this girl is like gorgeous and, completely normal looking. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's weird that they did that.
But it is the subtle messaging consistently in films, in television, on the radio, everywhere, as you say. And you're right. When I see a 30-year-old playing somebody's mother and that somebody is 20 pretending that they're 15, it is quite challenging, right?
We have no idea. Or sometimes you'll see somebody also, there's been a few movies and TV shows that I've seen come up too, where you'll have somebody playing somebody who's 45 and they're like a woman, and she'll actually be so much older. And you're sort of saying, that's not, come on, like as if like 45 is ancient. So it's we either have to look like we're 25 or we're 75. Like nobody knows what we really
and what's in the middle. And what about all of us, right?
Because either we're playing, honestly, if you're 50, you're playing somebody old.
Yeah.
Or you're playing 50, but they don't let you look 50. So it's women are screwed that way. That's why we have to keep fighting back. That's why we're not being quiet anymore.
So true. When I started this podcast, when the blog grew up and she became a podcast, one of the really interesting things for me was, and I chose then that it wasn't about me, it was about other women and chatting to incredible women like your good self to share their wisdom, to share those stories, because that's powerful in and of itself, that other women listen and say, oh, wow, like that really impacted me. I that resonates with me. But I then said, oh my God, I have to start really videoing this, which was like outside of my comfort zone. But the reality was, and my partner, bless him, said, you're all about in the magazine about showing women and seeing women, but you're telling these stories. They can hear them, but they're not seeing them. And I thought that's so powerful and so true. And I realized the only reason I wasn't doing it was because I was outside of my comfort zone. And a lot of guests too, they'll say, oh, I've never done that before. And I'm like, trust me, I'll be nice. I'll play nice. I think like at the end of the day, when you explain to them, when people see you, it changes their expectation. We need to see ourselves reflected back, right?
Absolutely. You got to walk the walk. I mean, it's different, but I'm thinking about somebody who asked me on a podcast if I ever, when I wrote my book, if I thought about using an alias, because I share so much. And I thought, but that would go against
Yeah.
The reason I wrote the book. Like, I didn't think about that for a second, because if I'm writing it to say to encourage people to let go of the shame, and I'm hiding who I am, that message doesn't make sense. It's the same reason why I didn't hold back on things that made me look bad. Like, there are things that I'm quite ashamed of that I think made me look terrible. I could have held those back, but then I'd still be holding on to the shame. And I had to sort of prove to myself too that no, I've got to put it all out there and own it all. And so that's the thing. It's like, there is such a freedom in just saying, this is who I am. This is how I look. This is how I think. This is what I did. Because what I discovered, I will say this, the biggest lesson I learned when I did tell my story, is that the things that we think are the worst, we're totally projecting. Because somebody else, sure, some things are people that are going to go, oh man, if they have no experience with it, but more people are going to go, oh my God, me too. Or just relate to it. And I will tell you, the one example I'll use is I will share that one part of my biggest shame, and here I'm saying it, and it was my biggest shame before I wrote the book. It was my biggest shame when I wrote the book. When I started talking about the book, is that I had indiscretions with married men, and that was not me, and I carried so much shame for so long, because I always say, when people say you shouldn't regret things, no, I do. I regret that. I don't hate myself for it anymore, because I understand, but I'll never feel good about that, and that's okay. But I remember doing my first book club, and I remember thinking, oh, it's going to be a lot of women that are going to have an issue with me with that. And I will tell you that I've done a few book clubs, nobody's brought that up. The one thing they did bring up, I talked a lot about how when I was dancing, and I had toddlers, I would go to the club and I would dance, and then I'd come home, go to the gym, go to the grocery store. I could go 2 to 3 days without sleeping. So their thing was like, how did you not sleep? We're so tired. And we were sleeping. And I'm like, that's what when they were reading it, nobody asked me about the indiscretions. But oh my God, I thought people are going to read it and they are going to hate me. So I held onto this for so long for no reason. And I think that's what we do. We see something in us that we're so ashamed of. And it's like that with our physicality also. The things that we focus on physically, there are things that I will look at myself in the mirror and go, oh, something about me I'm uncomfortable with. And then sometimes I will say, because I have a lot of self-talk in this head, and I'll say, okay, but you're focusing on a body part. When people see you, they're seeing the whole Marci vibe, and they're not focusing on that. And I think that's what we do. We assume that the thing, whether it's a personality trait or it's a physical trait, the thing that we're the most insecure about, we think that's what everyone else sees, but it's not. It's not. We're just so much more than that. And I think that's why it's so important that people who are, like you said, some of your guests are uncomfortable. I think that's why you got to do it, because when you do it and you realize the world didn't end. Like, that's what I realized by sharing my story. I saw that, like the world didn't end. It actually expanded. And I think that's with everything we do. It's going back to what I said originally. We're so fear-based, and when we let that fear go, or go through, you can't let it go, but when you move through it, then it dissipates. But you got to just trust that the fears are a little unrealistic, or at least exaggerated in our brains.
Yeah, so true. And I think, getting back to the book, because I think that this is so extraordinary about what you've done. Anybody, and I will tell everyone, go out and read this book. It is quite extraordinary. I think you are so kick-ass. But I think the powerful thing about this book, as you said, was that you were walking around carrying so much shame. There's a couple of lines in this book where you talk about being in a supermarket and you're with your child and you're in the supermarket, and this man walks down the aisle and he turns around and looks, and your son says, Mum, why is that guy looking at you? And you're like, oh, look, I don't know. But then going home and thinking, oh my God, how do I know that person? Did that person see me strip? Did I ever sleep with that person? All of that, right? That part of the book I found so powerful, because it was a moment where I felt like every woman in the same situation would feel the same, and you're standing there with your child and feeling, you said, I am completely dressed in the supermarket, feeling more naked than I've ever been before, and I paraphrase that, of course, but that really resonated with me, because in that moment you so beautifully described shame, right?
And it was, and I'll tell you something. I so this a lot of the craziness that happened almost 20 years ago. And I will tell you that maybe a year ago, I got a call from somebody, one of the men in my book that I talk about.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he was really my punishment. I think I called him school dad. And I would punish myself by seeing him because I had so low self-worth. I had to prove to myself how bad I was. And I mean, he still had my number. I guess my number hasn't changed, but wanted to rekindle. And it's funny because I got to say to him what I wrote about in my book. Like, and my book hadn't yet come out. Or no, so this was a little before that. But what I said to him was, it was so empowering because, again, I carried so much shame that I would have, in the past, I would have felt so awful when he contacted me. And this time, what I said was, he said, it wasn't just sex. Like, we had something. And I said, no. I said, we played a game. And the game was that you pretended that we had something special. And I pretended not to know that you were completely full of shit. And that's exactly what it was. And he was like, oh, well, and she still tried. He was romanticizing everything. And I'm like, I am not the same person that I was. And you're romanticizing a really terrible part of my life. And I'm not there anymore. And I will tell you that had I not written the book, I wouldn't have been able to do that. It would have crushed me to hear from him because it would have reminded me what a terrible person I was. But I know I'm not a terrible person. I'm a good person who did things I regret because I didn't have support and protection and any of that. I do now. So I'm going to act differently now. But that is the power of telling your story. And I think that not everyone has to write a book. Not everyone has to go on a podcast and tell their story. But I really do think that if you're holding on to something, tell someone you trust, because I'm telling you, however it is that you're feeling, as bad as it is, it's holding you prisoner and it's causing so much more damage and pain internally than letting it out. So that's the biggest gift I got from writing it was letting that go so that I can then move forward and see what's next. It was holding me back from experiencing what's next.
Yeah, wow. And look, you've had some extra, I know my listeners are probably going to hear the title of your book and they're going to want to ask, so I'm going to ask the question. Mm-hmm. You were a stripper for a short period of time. It's just and the reason that I haven't focused solely on that is because it's a moment, like it's a moment of your life. Right. It's not your whole life. It's mm-hmm. not who you were. But I guess the interesting thing is people will want to know how you ended up on that stage mm-hmm. being a stripper. How did that happen? And more importantly, how you moved away from it as well.
And to clarify, I don't have shame around that. I don't think anyone who dances should have any. So it's not that
I agree. I don't think it's a shameful thing.
No.
But the reason I'm saying though, but it is only really, even though it's a great title for the book, it's not your whole life. It's a part of your life.
Right. But it's a significant, because it's a very significant part, because it is the question of, I've had people who didn't read the book who would say kind of the generic stereotypical comment to me and say, well, you were just doing what you needed to do to put food on the table. And I say, no, that's not my story. I was married and he had a good job and there was food on the table. So that's not my story. So it is weird. How does this mother of two toddlers end up like that? And I will say also, before I even answer that, that was part of my double life, because that was sort of, had I just danced, I would have been happier. But I ended up kind of in this marriage where it opened up, and I ended up sharing myself with people that I wish I hadn't. So that's the double life is, soccer mom by day and then town vixen by night. But the dancing was, my marriage had taken a turn. My husband at the time wanted to open things up sexually. I didn't, but I was at this point where I'd been through a ton of trauma. And I felt, okay, if that's how he sees me, if that's how people see me, if I'm not worthy of love, going back to how I felt when my brother died and feeling like I had to earn my space. Okay, if I wasn't lovable, well, at least I could be desired, I guess. And so we started swinging, and I slept with other people, and then we go to strip bars, and I was still dealing with my eating disorder. So at one point I met a trainer who said, oh, I can get you to look like a fitness model, but I would have to pay him, obviously. And here with my self-worth, I was feeling like, well, I don't have a job because I've got two toddlers that I'm taking care of. So I need to pay him. And I felt guilty taking money from the household. I didn't want to spend money on myself that I hadn't earned. And so I thought, okay, so I need a job that I can make money to pay for my training, but I'm home with my children, so it can't be when they're home. So I decided stripping. So it became this thing where I would literally be home with my children. I'd put them to bed at night with their father was there. And then I would go to the club and I would dance. And then I didn't have a sip of alcohol the whole time I was doing that, or a drug. I was the only dancer who had a protein shake in her locker. And I knew at midnight, go and have my protein shake, my trainer approved shake. And I'd get home around 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would get into my gym clothes, and then I would go to the gym and I would work out, then the 24-hour grocery store and get what I needed for my kids, come home, take a shower, and be up with my kids. And I will tell you that there was something about the dancing though. And I said in the book, it's funny because there was this woman that I met there at one point, and she was dancing. I hadn't spoken to her before, and she came to me and she said, how long did it take you to get the nerve to go up on stage? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, I've been doing this for a few months and I haven't gone on stage yet. And I'm like, what? I didn't even know that was an option. I was like, the first day, that was my favorite part. I'm like, what? So there was a part of me, because I've always danced and I've always liked that. There was a part of me that loved the feeling of being appreciated that way. Now, I hated getting off stage and having to try to sell myself, having to try to convince someone to pay me to dance with them. I didn't like that part. But the being on, there was something, I guess, because I was in a marriage where I felt that I was being quite controlled that way, that this was a Marci, I should, not really Marci, I was Cassidy. So this was a Cassidy moment where I could just be in my own, feeling like I was owning my sexuality. In reality, I really wasn't, because I was sort of lending myself in ways I wish I hadn't. But there was something about it. Also, I guess, earning my own money. It gave me also, I felt like I was worth something. I was contributing to the household. So it was a very conflicting time, because it was like, I felt like it was empowering, but it really wasn't empowering. I wasn't really treating my body right because I wasn't sleeping or eating, but I wasn't doing drugs or drinking.
But
So
I thought it was
tough.
I thought it was gorgeous in the book though that you did feel empowered on that stage, but also at the time you working out with this trainer, you were feeling really good about how you looked at the time, and there must be kind of almost like a freedom in that as well, of going, look at
Tough to
me.
say though. It's tough because, again, I did I feel good about the way I looked? In some ways I did, but in some ways I was so terrified because I'm dealing with this eating disorder that
Eating disorder,
if I
yeah.
if I didn't eat the way I was supposed to eat, or then there was a panic. So it's a tough thing. Again, I think it was this very fleeting feeling of empowerment. Even when I was with men
Mm.
that I knew they didn't care about me. I didn't care about them. But it was me sort of saying, I think it was me saying to my husband at the time too, screw you. Like, he wanted me to share my body in ways that benefited him. And I kind of felt like, well, if you don't care, then I'm going to do it on my own. So it was this really weird, I'm going to be a rebel and take control of my body. But if I really wanted to be a rebel and take control of my body, I would have said, I'm leaving. I would have said, I'm going to do what's right for me. And I didn't. I went further into the madness. So it was but that was what was so enticing, right? If it was all bad, then it wouldn't have lasted years, because the dancing didn't last years, but the double life lasted years. So there was something. I was also afraid that if I stopped being sexual, that I was going to start eating more, because now there's a big thing, when people are going to see you naked, you're not going to eat as much, kind of thing. So it was, and I always say, I'm telling you, I abused my body with food and sex in the same way. I mean, I used both to abuse my body. It was a way of sort of punishing myself by either restricting my food or overeating my food. And same thing with sex, with seeking outside validation. So I always say also that I was, in some ways, I was so hyper focused on my body, which was through the food and how I looked at every minute.
Yeah.
And also so completely disconnected from it, which is when I was sleeping with the other people, I was disconnected from my body. So it's a bit of a mind screw as well.
God, yeah, wow. And it's and that's the thing though. I love that you know, and anyone who reads the book will see this, that you do talk so openly and honestly about this. And I was saying to you earlier, this podcast of mine started out as a blog many years ago, and I was writing under a pseudonym, which I created, The Good Girl, and not, you know, because I was so scared, because I was writing about my sex life and sex and dating. I, you know, bloody hell, I was on all the apps. I dated so many people, and I was just really open and honest about it, but I wasn't, because I was using a
Mm.
pseudonym, right? But I had
Mm-hmm.
teenage kids at the time, and an ex-husband who I thought would go to town if he realized, you know, I
Mm-hmm.
was writing about it. But quite fascinating. I think when I finally went, oh, and by the way, that's me and whatever, no one cared, you know, like no one was like, as you said, there was no judgment. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong, I was trolled a little bit. I got some lovely comments that I was a slut and whatnot, but, you know, I knew that that wasn't true either. And so
Right.
for me, it's like, but it's that fascinating thing of how, as you say, this double life, you know, my really close friends obviously knew it was me, but no one else did. And so then,
Right.
you know, when you come out and you go, oh, well, actually, that is me. And yes, I did. And people go, really? What, was that made up, or were you really doing that? And I was like, no, I was really doing it.
Mm-hmm.
and it was,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, you know, all kinds of fun and crazy and sometimes terrible. It was all of that. It's quite fascinating. I love that you've taken all of those experiences, though, as you say, in letting go of the shame, that you've been able to use that to empower other people. And when I say people, especially children,
Mm-hmm.
running these courses to help children feel good about themselves and to help bolster their self-esteem. Tell us how that came about.
I started that. It's funny because it wasn't a plan. I didn't plan on doing it. This is years ago when I was still married. And I had gone into, when I left the life, um, and I left the life, just the craziness. You know, and I'll tell you, I talk about it in the
Yeah.
book because you asked how I got out of it, and it was the hardest chapter for me to write. So I'll allude to it, but people have to read it to really grasp it. But it was when I talk about being with other people's husbands, which I'm not proud of. It was me literally, shows how long ago it was, because it was the family computer in the basement. And I'd wake up in the morning before going to my 24-hour gym, and I check my email. And one morning I get up and I see 3 emails from 3 wives, because men don't know
Ouch.
how to delete texts
Yeah, or
or emails.
emails or whatever.
And
Yeah.
it was literally 3 women saying, "Gotcha," yeah, but not so nicely. And it wasn't that I was caught. It was this realization that, oh my God, I'm hurting other people. Like, I knew I was hurting myself, but I really didn't realize I didn't realize I was, like, it would sound stupid, but I was in such a traumatized state of just insanity. And it was realizing, oh my God, there are women right now at this moment feeling bad, and I had something to do with that. And that was too much for me. And I just broke down, and that was it. That was it. I said to him, we're stopping everything, like everything. Um, and I went into an eating disorder program, and I got healthy, and I started sleeping, I started eating. I mean, everything just changed. And when I came out of it, my kids were little, they were still in grade school. And I didn't like the messages they were getting at school about health. It was all about weight. It wasn't about health gain, it was about weight loss. And I would hear little kids talking about skipping lunches and skipping snacks and being afraid of calories. And it made me crazy. And I went to the school and it was that little feistiness of the little girl in me that came back. And I said, I don't like these messages. I think they need to hear something healthy. And the principal's like, okay, come in next week. And I'm like, what? Huh? I had nothing. And I just put some pictures on a bristle board, and I spoke to the 8th graders, and just told my story, and I talked about media manipulation and airbrushing and photoshopping and the stuff that were told by marketers. And what I found was they wanted to talk about it. And I had some parents say to me, well, we're a little afraid because maybe they're not thinking about it. And if you start talking about, I'm like, they're thinking about it. Trust me,
Yeah.
they're thinking about it. And I believe the negative messages, I mean, they start fast and loud, and our positive messages as parents have to be even louder. And it just became a word of mouth thing where a kid would tell their parent would tell the school of their older sibling. And then it became this thing where called Fit versus Fiction. And I would go into school talking. I started with 3rd graders, and then I was asked to speak to 1st graders because it was such an issue. And at the time, we're going back 2007, like, social media was just starting. Facebook was just starting. So there weren't body positivity groups. There weren't body image groups anywhere. And nobody was talking about it. I mean, I would literally hear something on the radio that I didn't like, and I would call the radio station and say, you're perpetrating just or perpetuating just this negative messages about weight. And then they'd say, okay, do you want to be interviewed? Or I would see something on a TV show and I would call them up and say, but they would say to me, nobody wants to talk. It's not glamorous, sharing that you had an eating disorder, that I eat food out of the garbage, I mean, this is my reality. And I was talking about it, and it became a thing. And more and more people needed to talk. And then I started doing workshops for kids, doing workshops for teachers, doing workshops for parents, anyone who works with kids. I did one during COVID. I did one virtually for Girl Scouts in LA. So it's something. I think the thing that I find the most frustrating now is that somebody will send me some body image stat or some body image video or something now, and I'll be like, oh, I did the same thing like 15 years ago. Like it saddens me that it's still a thing. However, at least now, if you look for the positive messages, you can find the positive messages, but you have to look for it. And that's one thing my biggest advice to tell anybody is you're still going to be just inundated with negative messages that they're going to flood our social media stream, but unfollow anything that makes you feel lousy about yourself and look for the ones that make you feel good about yourself. Because they're out, thank God they're out there now, but you have to look a little bit harder for it.
Agreed. And I think as women, like in our demographic, I think it's really important that you do look for it, find it. There's a lot of amazing kind of platforms out now for women in our age group, and all saying the same thing. Let's change this bloody ridiculous narrative about how we're all supposed to look and feel and whatever. I think it's really important. I love, by the way, your podcast, and I do love a fellow female podcaster. I think yours is fantastic. So I want to get the name right so that I put it out there to everyone. But it's is it How to Ruin Your Own Reputation?
Yes. Yes.
And I've been listening to a few episodes. So a good friend of ours here at WB40 is Susan Jarvis, and she was on your podcast, talking about all things, about sexuality and, in midlife. She's brilliant. I'll give a shout out to her business, which is the Spicy Boudoir as well. I love that. She's brilliant. But tell me how you got into the pod. Like, how did the podcast start?
I'll tell you.
It just brings me so much joy, by the way.
Me too. But I have to say one thing about Susan. I have to say this. So we've done, and we just started a few months ago, but we've done several, and we've done things from talking about sugar daddies and sugar babies to sex work to porn addiction. And Susan's is the most not safe for work one that we've done. Susan's episode, we've done dominatrix, we've done sex slaves, we've done it all. But Susan's episode talking about sex over 50 is the one that was the most risque. And I think that's a feather, that should be a feather in her cap.
Absolutely, because it's a fab episode, by the way, everyone.
It was so much fun. It was so much fun. But it started, honestly, because I was a guest on a lot of podcasts and sharing my story, and people wanted to hear more and more. And what I realized was, when I called it How to Ruin Your Own Reputation, because I had to make that decision when I found out my book was going to be published. Am I ready to risk ruining my own reputation with it coming out? And I realized I was ready, and it was the best thing I ever did. So I thought, okay, so there are other people who either want to share their stories or who can't, but really, really, they benefit from hearing from other people. And so I highlight people who are living lives that some people don't understand. Sometimes it's just an unusual job. They're not all salacious. I've had on spies, I've had on former police officers, a psychotherapist. But oftentimes it's people who live an underground kind of life, and we're bringing awareness to it to say we're just normal people. We're just, and I think that we have to take the stigma off of how lifestyles that are different than our own. I think what I say all the time is, even though the details of our stories are different, there are often themes running through them that are the same. Same with my book, body image stuff, relationship stuff, self-worth stuff. I mean, this is all, grief, we've all done that. And so oftentimes I'll have somebody who will listen to an episode going into it ready to judge. I'm going to judge this dominant sex master and his sex slave. And they come out of it going, I didn't realize that was pretty deep. Like I learned something. And that's what's so amazing. And so that's, I'm loving it because I'm getting to meet really interesting people, but it does break down some barriers because I do believe, and I'm sure you've seen this absolutely, is that the more you talk, especially if the conversations are uncomfortable, the more you talk, the more people will listen and hopefully learn and judge less. Because if there's one thing we don't need any more of, it's judgment in this world, and we need to listen more. So that's why I came, and I'm having the time of my life with that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I love all the messaging. And I kind of went, oh, Susan's on this. Of course, I listened to Susan's episode first, but then I've been listening to the others. And I'm like, you're right. What I love about it is that, you're showing a very human side of all of this, right? And I love too that there'll be so many people out there listening to your podcast who are like, oh, God, well, I actually lived that life and no one knows
Exactly.
it,
Oh, I
right?
have had that. That's the
Yeah.
amazing thing. I mean, I had
Yeah.
a couple, sorry to cut you off, but we did one on open marriages. And then I had somebody I knew years ago who messaged me. She goes, just so my husband and I are going on a date with another couple. And I'm like, wow, okay. And it was something I knew years ago. And I would never guess. But there you go. So yeah, we're not
See,
so
there you
different. We're not so different, you know?
No, I think that, as I said, everybody's got something, whatever it may be. When I launched WB40 magazine, I seriously, in the first edition of that magazine, because we went to print, we actually brought it out in print. And there was one of the writers actually wrote about being at a sex party and her experience of being at this sex party. It got so much attention because, I think you're right. People immediately went, oh, where's that article? Because they went probably with some judgment or
Mm-hmm.
only to go, oh, hang on, she's a normal person. She's a mum. She's all these things, whatever. And but she was at this sex party and was able to take people by writing it, was able to take
Right.
people into this and kind of break down the stigma of what was involved in that. And when she contacted me and said, do you want to publish it? And I said, yep. I do. And she said, well, I'll send it to you, read it first and then let me know. In reading it, I was just like, it just makes total sense. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't we publish this? This is a woman who was 50. This is a woman, she was late 40s at the time. All of that stuff. And you just kind of go, I just think it's so brilliant to show people, shine a light on things. I always say too, and this is the same, I was a kid who grew up with a fairly traumatic childhood. My mantra is, if you shine a spotlight in dark corners, no monsters can live there, right?
Yes.
But it's the same with everyday stuff. So if you
Mm-hmm.
shine a spotlight on anything, suddenly everything disperses because you go,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I did not know that. And as you say, at the very least, even if that's not your bag, even if that's not what you're into, you learn something new, right? It's
Yeah, I do think
fascinating.
it does humanize situations that we take that I think it's, and I say that too all the time. It's when you keep something in the dark, it's just that's where it grows badly. But if you let it out, I mean, things are so not as scary as we think they're going to be. And I mean, I think it's so, plus I think it's so interesting to keep learning. I mean, I think when you don't listen to people whose stories are different than yours, then you don't learn. And I mean, where's the fun in that? It's exciting to learn about, and like you said, even if it's not your bag, it's just fun to listen to
It
somebody
is.
else share a different, I don't know, and maybe you're gonna get some ideas, and maybe who knows, but I think that's what life should be about. It's like you take what is the expression? It's like, take what you want and leave the rest, but don't judge anyone else for what they do. And I think that's also a reason why I wanted to share my story, is that people will see me on social media and I am singing and I am lip syncing and stuff. And I never wanted though somebody to say, because people will say, oh, how are you happy all the time? I'm like, what? I'm not happy all the time. Are you
Read the
kidding me?
book, lady. Yeah.
What? Or even when I'm, because I would literally dance down my street. When I did that this morning, I have music and I dance. I'm like the dancing lady in the neighborhood. And I've had somebody say to me, a construction worker, as I passed by, he was like, you must be the happiest person I've ever seen. I'm like, the world's on fire. I'm not happy all the time, but this makes me happy. And I think it's important that people, I felt like, even though I wasn't trying to say I'm happy all the time, I felt almost like a fraud. Like I didn't want people to think I just had the charmed life and everything was great. I think it's important that people know that I hit some dark places where I really thought maybe I shouldn't be here anymore. Maybe I didn't deserve to be here anymore. And I think that it's important that people know that you can be in the darkest place ever. And I believe that we were given a certain amount of strength in life. And I felt I had used mine up already and I had nothing left. And then lo and behold, oh, there was something there that I didn't even realize was there. And I think it's really important that people know that you could be at your worst and you don't see the light, but it's there. You don't see it, but it's there. And you don't know what's going to be. And so that's why I wanted people to see that, yes, I'm happy and I dance and I do whatever, but there's pain there, and I'm real, and there's shit there. And I think that we all have that. So I don't want anyone to look at somebody who seems like they have it all and think that their life pales in comparison because they're not waking up, grateful to be alive every day, because that's bullshit. Who is? Maybe if you're a sociopath, but so it's just we're all layered. No one's all good, no one's all bad. We're all layered, and we just have to listen more. And I love doing shows like this because I think it connects people. And with women, I think I think that we judge ourselves harsher than anybody else, and I think that needs to stop.
Oh,
Because we're
absolutely.
fabulous.
We're brilliant. Look at us. I think you're right. And I do think, Sally, I always talk about this as well. I think, and you mentioned this before, you touched on it, with this thing about, they go, oh, social media is all bad because we compare ourselves and whatever. Social media is not all bad, because through social media, I have met so many extraordinary, dynamic, kick-ass human beings who are kind of making their mark on the world, who no one would have seen without social media, right? And then that's a great loss to so many people. I mean, that's a reality. And women who are really out there doing ballsy, incredible shit and going, this is who I am, warts and all, no makeup, with makeup, this, that, whatever. I think it's brilliant. I think it really is. One thing I really wanted to touch on with you too was in the letting go of the shame. You talk about this, a lot, that in the letting go of the shame, you discovered other things about yourself. And one of those things about yourself was you wanted to live a very authentic life. And part of living an authentic life was that you no longer wanted to live it with men.
Right.
Just, I've caught you off guard. You didn't look like I wasn't going to ask that.
No, because you know what? Well, that's funny because I didn't really realize that. Well, I always feel bad. So there's an audio version of my book too. If anyone goes onto Audibles, if they like audiobooks, and that was a tough. When I was reading it for the audiobook, the toughest part. Well, there were a few tough parts to read out loud, but one tough part was I think I actually say in the book I'm not gay, that I'm straight, and it's tough for me to read that because no, that's not, I am gay, and I think, or I call myself queer, like that's how I kind of identify, and it was something that was a long time. It took me a long time to understand that. I mean, I talk in the book about a situation I had with a woman in my 30s when I was married, but I didn't have time. Not time. It wasn't the right time for me to figure out what is that about. I mean, I was married with 2 kids. Again, like it would have been selfish for me to explore that. So I considered myself straight with a twist, and kind of went on with my life, and then told myself it was just a phase, or it was just her. It was just her, and went on like that for like over a decade. And then it was, even when I got divorced, I still dated men. I dated a lot of men because I think I was like, maybe this one, maybe that one. Like I tried a wide assortment and selection, but I never just connected. And I was a sexual person. It wasn't bad. I wasn't having bad experience. I just wasn't. I really thought that I was lousy at relationships. I thought I was lousy at love. Because it just didn't. I was the one who'd be in every relationship, and I would wake up in the middle of the night going, I can't do this. I can't do it. It just didn't feel. And I would leave and then I would leave the relationships. And I would see TV shows and movies where the women, you're having a breakup and they're sobbing over ice cream. And I'd be like, what's their problem? I feel great. Like I always felt like, so like, phew. I still didn't realize. And I will tell you this, it wasn't until a few years ago, I was on a date, and my book hadn't come out yet, but I was on a date, and it was a great date. It was with a guy, attractive guy. We were like walking by the water. It was so nice. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a really great date. The only thing make it better is if it was with a woman. And I'm like, who said what? And I had to realize I knew I was having feelings, but I thought it was too old. I thought it was too late. I thought I didn't have a right to acknowledge that part of myself. And then COVID hit, and I was just like, and then you have lesbian TikTok. That's something, I'm telling you. And I realized, I'm watching the videos of the guys being all sexy and I'm like, eh. And then you see the women, I'm like, ooh. But I was feeling very sad. Like I started to feel very sad and very trapped. And I think I was going to say COVID was great. No, it wasn't great. But I think what it did was it made it harder to date. So it gave me time to really be on my own. And instead of trying to force a situation that wasn't right, I really had to say, okay, what do you want? And yes, releasing the book. If I hadn't written the book, I wouldn't have happened, because it really was this, okay, I got rid of all that crap. And I'm starting to kind of unlearn who I'm not and let go of who I'm not. And who the fuck am I? Right. And I realized I don't want, and it's not, I make this very clear because I hate when people will say this all the time. I've just had this conversation especially if it's a guy that I knew in the past will contact me again. And I say, I'm queer. Oh, I don't blame you. Guys are terrible. Or I don't blame you. You've had bad experiences with men. And I'm like, it has nothing, believe it or not, it has nothing to do with men. It's like people assume, especially if you come out later, that you're dating women because it didn't work out with men. Women are not a consolation prize when it doesn't work out with men. That's not what it is. And if I know more straight women that are upset with men than gay women. And if I just had bad experiences, then I just wouldn't date. But you don't just all of a sudden develop an attraction and a whatever. And yeah, and again, it was that feeling of I've spent so much time kind of looking the wrong way that I'm not wasting any more time. And that was another thing. God love my children. I mean, they're so great that it was like, and because I don't do anything small. So when I came out in an article in a magazine. I'm like interviewed in the radio. So I do it big because that's how I want to live my life. I want to live my life open, and I want to soak it all in. I mean, I say all the time, I've cried enough tears in my life. So now when I want to sing, I'm going to sing. If I want to dance, I'm going to dance. I'm going to love whoever I want to love. And that's it. And yeah, it's a, so that's why I laugh too when somebody will interview me and they'll say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, 5 years? Like I change, first of all, I change every 6 months. What, are you kidding me? So I don't know. And that's what's so great. I don't know what's next, but it won't be boring. I can promise you that.
Oh, it will never be boring. And the reason I raised it was because I've actually had other guests and other women actually contact the magazine, the platform, talking about exactly that they're in their 50s and they've come out. And as you say, that's why I raised it, because I think, again, you can't be what you can't see. You can't.
Yes.
And you feel alone. Some of those women feel really alone because they're like, as you said, oh my God, but now I'm this age. What the hell do I think I'm doing? And maybe I should just be alone for the rest of my life. And I'm like, what? Why? Go out and live your life and embrace it. And if you're struggling with that, find someone to help you with that, right?
Find your people because I do think that I did fear that I wouldn't be accepted. I did fear that because I had a history with men that I didn't have a right. I did feel all that. And I know that a lot of people do feel that, but it's actually, and there are some women in the gay community that aren't super welcoming, but most people are. And also there's so many, again, go back to social media, there are so many pages and groups and organizations you could find of women who came out late. So just, there is support out there. So don't waste another minute of your life being who you think you're supposed to be, and let that keep you from being who you really are, because that's a shame.
Yeah, it's such a shame, isn't it? And I think this is what I love about you. The authenticity is brilliant and your fearlessness is incredible. And I love that through your book, you've been able to, I think, reach so many people and maybe help them to start looking at letting go of their shame, because shame's just such a heavy thing to carry, isn't it?
It is, and unnecessary. So I think that if anybody does look into me, read my book, find me on social media, send me a message, contact me, reach out to me, because the worst thing is feeling like you're alone in an experience when really there's so many people who share the same experience. If you just talk about it, if you don't talk about it, then you think you're alone. But really, there's so many people. We've all been, like you were saying, we've all been through stuff, and it's really the dirtiest, messiest secrets that connect us. It's the thing we think it's going to separate us from people, but those are the things that connect us. It's not the pure positivity stuff. It's the stuff that we're afraid of. It's that vulnerability that connects us. So we have to feel more comfortable in the things that we think make us uncomfortable.
Yes, I love that. That's a perfect quote, actually. I love it. I'm going to be sharing all of your links
Thank
in the
you.
show notes for this podcast and across social, so everyone will know where to find you, how to buy your incredible book or listen to the book. As you said, it is out now on Audible, but also too where they can find your amazing podcast, which I am loving. It just brings me so much joy, and that's the thing, right? I mean, this is life, I think anything that brings joy is a great thing. So
Absolutely.
right,
Absolutely.
as you said, the world is on fire, but you know what, we can make happiness within that as well, and that's an important message that you share, and I love that very much.
Well, thank you. I always say don't be ashamed to look ridiculous. Like I'll post a silly dance video and for a second I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna look ridiculous, and then I'm like, if somebody has an issue with my joy, then that's their problem, right? Then that's their problem. I'm gonna be
And
as
also move
ridiculous as
along.
I can be. Yeah.
I love your dancing and I love your videos, and honestly, if anyone who doesn't, there's something wrong if you don't love it. It just, hey, you can't
That's
not
right.
smile.
That's right.
You're fab. All right, thank you so much, Marci, for joining me here today.
Thank
I
you
think
so
you're
much for
brilliant.
inviting me. I think you're brilliant right back. Thank you for what you do. Really.
Thank you so much. I think you just made my day. So stay warm over there in Canada. Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine. Available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.